It's a major uprising, there's no doubt. It's of historic importance, but it falls into a regular pattern. Try to preserve the old order as much as possible. So the West supported Mubarak literally up to the last minute. When he couldn't be supported anymore, they sent him off to Sharm el-Sheikh or wherever he is, and they're now trying to see if they can sustain the same regime pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle, because popular forces in Egypt have been very dedicated, very courageous. We should remember, this didn't come out of nowhere. There have been militant labor actions for years, crushed by the dictatorship.
Do you believe that what's happening in Egypt and Tunisia will turn into a real democracy? You've been known to be very critical of democracy as we know it in the West.
Well, I think if it got to the point of democracy in the West with all its flaws, that would be a big advance. But the West is going to do anything it can to prevent that. And there's a very simple reason for it. Just take a look at the studies of Arab opinion. They're not reported in the West, but they're certainly known to planners. These are studies carried out by U.S. polling agencies and so on. And the results are very clear. So take, say, Egypt. In Egypt, 90% of the population thinks that the U.S. is the major threat they face. Israel as well, regarded as kind of like an offshoot of the United States. 80% of the population thinks the region would be better off if Iran had nuclear weapons. If you go through the rest of the region, the figures aren't very different. Well, the West is certainly not. If to the extent that democracy extends, policy will be a reflection of public opinion. That's by definition. And the last thing the West wants is a region where the overwhelming majority think the West is the major threat to their interests, and they'd be better off if Iran had nuclear weapons. That's not what the West wants. If the West were to intervene, it should be clearly understood that that's not for humanitarian reasons. If it were humanitarian reasons, they'd be intervening in Saudi Arabia and so on. It's for very simple reasons. This is an oil state that is not a loyal dictatorship, unlike the loyal dictatorships where you support the repression. But under those circumstances, any kind of intervention is going to have complicated consequences. The major Western interest in the Middle East is the energy resources. That's why there's tacit authorization to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait to crush uprisings very quickly. They have to maintain the energy resources. That's why the Western powers have been strongly supporting radical Islam and even the funding of jihadism for a long time. They're recognized to be a barrier to secular nationalism. And secular nationalism carries with it the threat that the resources of the region would be used for the people of the region, and not for the West and a couple of families of super rich dictators.
But you might think that with what is being thought now about Fukushima, that this might be an opportunity to rethink the energy policies in the West. But do you see that happening?
Unfortunately, it's going the other way. The most serious events are taking place in the United States. If the U.S. is the richest and most powerful country. If it doesn't do much, nothing much is going to happen. And what's happening in the United States is quite ominous. The major corporations, the business world, has been quite openly, publicly running major propaganda campaigns to try to convince the public that there is no threat of global warming, that it's an invention. And they've been, unfortunately, pretty successful.
If it were possible, would you like to be around in another 82 years?
frankly, the world that we're leaving to our grandchildren is not one that I'm optimistic about. We're leaving them a potential tragedy, I think, maybe an irreversible one.
That's indeed very pessimistic.
We can do something about it, but it's not happening.
Yeah. Yet you are still standing, fighting, arguing.
Because we can do something about it. If we don't, it's tragedy.
Mr. Chomsky, thank you very much for talking to us.
Yeah.